So let's go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the document where let's see, yeah, go up, to that section. I broke it up into sections. That was a lot of shit I wrote. Okay, yeah. All right. So basically, this document we're going to cover really has three sections to it. One is what you're looking at now is actually my UAI XML that replaces the one that comes with vanilla. And then there's a documentation file that normally gets included from the UAI.xml file included in the core. It goes more into the weeds on that. And then there's a small section which is the comments that are part of the vanilla UAI, which are misleading and don't really offer a lot of value, but I included it for the sake of it. So let's go ahead and cover this first section. It should give you a 50,000 foot view of UAI. Now, UAI stands for Utility AI. It is a package that is included in the code of the game that TFP was using for when they started playing with bandits, and for some reason they decided to back away from doing bandits at that point, work on other aspects of the game, and we'll get back to it. We think they will continue using this system since they haven't deleted it out. It's a possibility. They may buy a third-party package, which is maybe a more advanced tree-driven. But this is actually a pretty good system. It's pretty powerful and flexible. We hope they use it. If not, we'll do whatever they do downstream. But for now, it's better than the built-in AI that's used for zombies and animals called Entity AI or EAI. And I assume you guys can hear me because nobody's saying you can't.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. So this is my documentation. I like to document my XML best I can. As the first, it says up there in the core, there's another UAI file that doesn't really have any instructions. It's just a document file that will be appended to your save game and your dump folder. There'll be, if you look at Utility AI, what you're reading here as it's updated will always be updated and included in your save game folder there. And this may not have all the latest stuff, but it's pretty close. So basically, to activate a UAI package, you go ahead and you have to declare that in entity class XML. Now you can have all the lines, the old lines, tasks, and targets that you used to, and that stuff all works. But if you include this property in there that I put, basically the example, AI property name, AI packages, value, and then one or more entries, it overrides the EAI. The EAI will not work. So that's sort of your toggle. Put an AI package in there, and you're running Utility AI. If you don't have it in there, you're running EAI. Basically, there's a couple of recommendations here. When you order your considerations, you want to put them in order of most likely to fail to the least likely to fail. And the reason for that is once you're in a section, if part of it fails, it immediately exits that and doesn't burn any CPU time figuring any of the rest of it out. The next line just basically, I've tested animal NPCs using UAI, works just like humans do. So far so good on that. And you don't want to use multiple versions of the same type of packages. So you will see that as we go right down here, we have a human basic and then a human timid basic at the very bottom of it. You wouldn't combine human basic with a human timid basic because they're flavors of the same type of thing. So you want to use one of each kind of package. And that's why I kind of labeled them human basic, human timid basic, and there's one more down the bottom, human hero basic. The only big difference between those really is a little behavior difference. Heroes don't run away. Timids run away, whenever they see enemies, and so on and so forth. And then the normal. So let's scroll up and cover the first of these packages. So every character needs to have a basic movement package. So we're going to just cover human basic here. You could call it human movement basic. Inside of a package, think of a package as a container. So you can call AI package, you can give it any name you want, Ralph, Mary, or human basic. It doesn't matter what you name it. It's something as a mnemonic for yourself. Inside of that package, it'll have an action, and an action basically is a code class. either one written by TFP or one written by SphereII at this point. The action in this case is wander basic. And basically what that is it's the lowest common denomination. If the character's got nothing else to do, you want it to not just stand there and look stupid. You want it to move a little bit. So wander basic is the default action that a character will take. It's given a weight of 1. Now, a weight of 1 is basically a scoring multiplier. It gives you some flexibility of how important a given task within a package is scored related to the other things it could possibly do. So wandering is the least important, so I started that with a score of 1. And if it has nothing else to do, it'll wander, but if it's got something else to do, it won't. It'll do that other thing. Basically, wander has a few parameters with it: stop distance, max distance. And I'm not going to read every little bit of this to you, but you don't have to specify those. There are defaults in there that work pretty well. There's a thing next called considerations about that specific task. Now that means, should this task fire or not? If the task fires, it's multiplied times its weight, and that's its final score. But if it fails one, or if it fails any condition, if any of those condition classes score out not true, basically score close to 0 or very close to 0, it's not going to run. So we have a thing called is not busy, and the reverse of that would be is busy. But in this case, if it's not busy doing something else, an activity like, and I won't get too far down the rabbit hole on that, but like if it's at a workstation, it should be pounding away at the workstation or should be looting a container, it's busy. That'll be set later. But if it's not doing those type of activities, then it's allowed to wander. If it is, it should stay there and not wander. So it's a switch, on-off switch. There's also considerations. Is there enemy not near? Now you can always flip this, but if it's true, this case, if it's not enemy not near, means it's true if no enemies are near. So it's okay to wander, but if there's an enemy near, we want to shut down the whole wandering process. The wandering task is very aggressive. The code is looping through, and it seems to always want to wander. So it's important to not let it wander when there's other things to be done. So we're going to shut that off if there's an enemy nearby. And the other thing we have in this consideration is, does it have an order? And in this case, you can have a list, but the one that I put in there is follow. If you've ordered it to follow, you don't want it just wandering off. You want it to just skip the whole idea of thinking about wandering, just follow. Okay, hopefully that's making sense to you all. The next action here, it's called leader follow. So we've put in a specific section. This is new. This used to be tucked into the wander, but we pulled it out to give a little more granular control over leader. Now, leader has a weight of 2, which is relatively more important than anything else you've seen. It's twice as important. So the consideration is to, do I have a leader? Of course, obviously you want this to fail immediately. If you haven't hired anybody, this guy, if it's not hired, he doesn't have a leader. So just fail and don't even consider the action follow the leader because you don't have one. And then the consideration, does it have an order to follow? Now, as you know, NPCs, you can hire them and they don't have to follow you. That's a switch. If you want them to follow you or not, you tell it. And so if you've got the order to follow, it is true, and it will allow it to do the task, follow the leader. We also skip this investigate. We're working on a new task to kind of move to investigate. So we're not going to cover that right now. It basically uses the is alerted bool, whether the NPC thinks something's up in the area. We'll work on that. It might be useful for Blood Moon. And then a flee activity. Again, this is a basic character. It's not a scaredy cat. It's not going to flee all the time and not going to never flee. So why would it flee? Okay, so the task is flee from a target. And it has some defaults here. The maximum distance, 25. When it runs away, go up to 25 meters away and then reevaluate the situation. But will it flee? What is the things it has to consider? Well, it's going to consider its self-health. What is its health? Right now, just for, I put in there 0.1 to 0.5. That is between 10% of its maximum health and between half health. It'll consider running away. You can put that whatever you want in there, more or less. You can actually also, and I didn't cover that here, you could put in absolute numbers. You don't have to do percentages, although I think that's better, because you could put in like a minimum of 10 hit points and a maximum of 50 hit points. But that's completely different consideration if the character has 100 hit points, if it has 500 hit points. So I like percentages, but that class will use absolute values as well. The next consideration is the target and enemy. You don't want them running away from friends, right? So we've kind of reduced this down to a simple binary. If it's an enemy, it's going to score in the factions to 127 or less. Over 127 and higher is more of an ally, I should say more of a friend. So if it's scoring, if the faction relationship is low, it'll consider it an enemy and consider running away. Next one is, how far is this guy away from me? This one's a little more complicated. It took me forever to kind of wrap my brain around it. But target distance here, minimum 0, maximum 10. So basically, forget the flip file for a second. The way this works is, it's true if the target is in that range. So if you're within 0 and 10, if the guy's that close to you, consider running. Flip y is basically a math function that it takes the output of the math calculation and basically inverts it. We want to get to a 0 to be a fail and a 1 being is a true. So a 0 would be a false and a 1 would be a true. We have to flip that value if we want to consider the values inside of the specified range. So don't let the flip y get you. It's just how it's the language built in, and it's kind of what we're stuck using right now. So if it's close by, it'll consider running. If it's far away, not going to do it. Then the last consideration I put in there is self-visible. Is basically, if the bad guy can't see me, I'm probably good just hiding here. So I'm not going to run and expose myself if he can't see me. So again, if he could see me, I'm going to consider running. So it considers all 4 of those things, and if all 4 of those things are true in the current moment, it will flee. Now the flee has a weight of 5, which means I just scored it really high. So when it gets into a pickle, it will consider doing that more so than almost anything in the game. Why 5? Just pulling numbers out of my ass. It may turn out to be better 4 or 8. I don't know. That's when you guys come into play. You'll try these things and figure out, what is the best number to use in this. I'm not putting all this into a graphing calculator and considering every possible combination and figure out what it would always do in every situation. Someone can do that. I just don't have the time to go through that level of analysis. Human timid is almost the same thing. The one down the bottom is that. Basically, you'll just see a little difference in the conditions. The leadership stuff, the wander stuff's all the same. But what it does on flee is different. But basically, it's going to say if it's an enemy and it's within 15 and he could see me, I'm going. And that's basically it. Hero just doesn't even have that action in there. It just never flees. Let's go in. That covers kind of the basic wandering and movement. If you can just leave it at that. If you've got a villager, just put timid in. Don't give them any attack ability or whatever, and just be kind of like a guppy villager if you ever played as Medimod. They'll just run away. Okay, so here is
good reference.
Yeah, here's melee. Melee's divided up. I just did a couple different types of melee, and again, it doesn't have to be this way. You can make up 27 different melee type of packages that you want. Use the ones you want. You've got special characters. I made a special one for a girl who uses a missile launcher, but that's all optional. This is just to give you all some examples of how you would work this stuff, and it works decently as is. So in Melee Basic, its first action is move to the enemy melee. That's sort of like in the old EAI is move and approach to target. Same leverages the same basic operations there. It's got some parameters. One is run equals false. If you put that in there, the character will lock out the running, and it will use the basic approach speed to come towards a target. The fail on distance to leader, that's a new little thing. Basically, that allows us to have the character stop moving, and if he gets too far away from the leader, just basically allow us to teleport him and bring him back. So that's new. We're still working and testing that one. Target type should be self-explanatory. This is kind of like you used to put in the AI targets. What classes do you want to target? And so right now that's still working basically on target type by class. The target is enemy. You saw that I didn't document if you've already seen these before. So target is enemy is the same one that we covered before. If he scores low on the faction, it's true that he's an enemy. If it scores higher, it's not. Saying the distance we covered, but basically in this particular case, I only want it to melee if it's really within weapons range. I don't want him to try to melee if he's far out. Now, what's kind of neat about this, those of you that have been playing with this before, we tried weapon swapping in A19 and it was pretty much a failure. What we did this time is if a character has a rifle and he is far more than I'll cover that in a second, but more than, say, out of melee range, he will shoot with the rifle. If he's inside melee range, he's going to do rifle butts and going to try to melee with that weapon until he can increase his distance into rifle shooting range. Don't have to do that. You could make this thing point blank fire. If you got a shotgun, you might not want to do that. You might want to just stick the shotgun in the belly of the player and shoot. That's cool. You can do it either way you want, but this is an example of how to set up both ranged and melee on the same character at the same time. So I think most of that's clear. The distance, you want to consider distance, you want to consider visibility, whether it's an enemy or not, and the target type. The backup range, I'm going to catch up to you. Yeah, when you stop, I can see. All right. There's different range attacks. I have basic range, and then I have that does not include meleeing in the package. And enhanced is basically the same as range with the ability to melee. So I just kind of separate that out from now. You see, we've added an additional action. Well, we'll cover backup range since we scrolled down and didn't cover it in the first class. We're in the enhanced now, and that's cool. So basically, I want range to try to stay around 15 away. And so I set a max distance. So it will try, when it decides it's too close, it will try to get 15 away. It'll flee and turn around, run, and try to set up 15 blocks away from its target. And that's where it starts kiting. That's the kiting function that comes in. Whether it should be 15, I don't know. But that's where we're at. And you notice I've given that away to 4, which means it's about equal as a range attack, not as much as a melee attack, but certainly more than moving around to get closer to the enemy. Is it an enemy still in there? The target distance is still in that range. This one is for me in there. Self not has buff is zombie. That's pretty cool because you can use buffs to turn on and off these particular tasks. So in this case, if I think maybe you guys know my infection system. So if a character has a rifle and he gets infected and starts turning into a zombie, at some part of that process, he goes from being infected to a zombie. Well, I don't want zombies running around with guns. So once he gets the is zombie buff, it locks out the ability to do ranged attacking and ranged maneuvering at that point. So that's an example of how I use a buff based on what the character has turned zombie or not into enabling or disabling it. It's enabled by default, but I switch it off if it based on the zombie buff. Hope that makes sense, so I don't want to get too far down. And yeah, so this pretty much covers this. I do have reloading in here. Now, without getting too much into the weeds, I'm using vanilla weapons, actually the vanilla prefabs without any changes right out of the game. They already have their own built-in animator in them, and it works flawlessly. But I also have to get the character to do its own reloading physical to keep up with the gun. And so that has to be called manually in the process. And I made a buff called buff reload, which tells the animator time to do the reload animation and sync it up reasonably well in there. That's what that is. Why do I have that in there? Well, if he's got the reloading buff, it means he's reloading. And at this case, I don't want him moving at that time. So, in this case, attacking. I don't want the gun going off while he's reloading it, because if I don't have that in there, it enables it to shoot. So it's not going to do a range attack if it's in the process of reloading, and that's what that's in there. So there's a couple examples of having a buff and not having a buff, allowing this thing to be true, the conditions to be true, the considerations to be true, and allowing the range attack. And then melee is the same thing. You notice the distance is 0 to 2. That's pretty much melee distance. So if it's in that range, it will consider a melee attack. Again, if it's not in that, it's not going to do that. I'd say any questions, but I don't even know where I would see questions because my screen's recording and I can't see. So I'm going to not even look if there's any typed questions to the end. If I hear you, I'll answer, but otherwise I can't see that. The last entry down there, human range launcher, is just a slightly different thing. Yes, we've got the launcher class working on these guys now. So essentially you've got mobile artillery. You put it in the hands of a human, but I'm sure Dark's going to put it in the hands of a mech, and then just have mechs bombing the shit out of bases from range. But it's essentially the same thing. Moved away the retreating tack, because if you're stupid enough to charge them, this thing will drop a missile at your feet with deadly accuracy. You're just not going to make it with the amount of damage that these things do. So, well, at least I can't. I'm sure some of you guys are better at strafing and kiting than I am. So let's move down into the next package, healing. So you would, right now, most of my characters, they have the basic movement package and a basic attacking package. But let's say you want the characters to be able to heal themselves in a fight. The basic version of healing is just heal yourself. And I gave that a high weight of 6, which to me is more important than attacking generally. So if he's really hurt, should try to heal himself. So again, what does this say? Well, it's heal self. On the start of this, when it fires true, it's going to add the buff heal on the character. Considerations to gear is, well, we don't want it to be heal if it's already healing. And so if it's running the buff heal health or buff process consumables, it won't run. Now, interesting fact, we very recently hitched up the whole character perk system to this. So if in the case of a nurse, basically she'll start off randomly from a skill of 1 to 3 perk levels in healing, and if it all works out in the end the way it's supposed to, that nurse with the perk level 3 of healing will heal a lot more than a basic healer would do. That's pretty cool. It's still in the very infant stages of it, so but it does. Healing does work. Self-heal. When should it heal? Well, in this case, it's set up to heal between 10% damage and 50% damage. Why not 0? Well, I thought that characters should have a last gap ability to attack. If you're down that low, don't waste your time pulling out a bandage. Just start whacking. That's what I generally do when I'm playing. But again, change it if you don't like it. And then finally, self has item. Any vanilla medical item has a tag of medical. So whether it's a healing kit, a bandage, this character will use anything that's in its backpack or on its toolbar. So it starts with 5 bandages right now. When it runs out, can't heal. But if you go ahead, hire them, and put more bandages or whatever in the backpack, it's good to go again. So you can restock your hired characters. I put enhanced heal in here. Basically, that's not only healing self, but also heals others. And it evaluates its target, same kind of way. If your target, let's say it's just another NPC that's in the same allied group, then, well, if I've got a bandage and it's half damaged or more, it's an ally, and I got a bandage, I'm going to run over there and heal him. Same thing applies to the leader. If it's a leader, then I'm going to heal him, but I'm going to heal him when he's 65% or less damage because, hey, he's the boss. I'll give him a little extra attention. But also I'll check there to see if I actually have a leader. Otherwise, it will hard fail that one. And then a heal on demand function, which isn't hitched up yet, that's a menu item where you'd walk up to the NPC and say, heal me, and it would go ahead and do that. I haven't tested that. I'm not even sure. We're still got to work on the menu. So that's not, that one's not hooked up, but that's how that would work. Go down, then one more, Dark. Let's talk about activities. Activities are packages that, optional packages that you might want one or more characters to do. One that I really like here that works very, very well is looting. And so basically you tell it that it has a task called loot. Don't run to the containers. What do you target? Target objects that have loot, secure loot type containers, and a buff on it. Basically, the buff is an activity buff. And so the considerations are, first we had to put a cooldown in there because this thing would just chain loot. So once it loots, it's going to wait, I think that's in seconds, 200 seconds before it would loot the next loot container. It's not going to loot if there's an enemy nearby because there's other more important things to do at this time. Go attack it or run away or do whatever. And again, it doesn't have a buff called an activity cooldown. And we were playing with task locking that we didn't want it to chain. I think that the other cooldown is a new feature, so we may not need both. Again, this is a work in progress. We can cool it down by a buff, or we can cool it down with a consideration. Either or both may work well. Then there's a crafting one, which I haven't spent a lot of time on. But basically, when it comes near a target, like if you have a baker and he's near a stove, then have him start the baking animations. The long-term plan is for NPCs to look in their backpack. If they've got the materials that they need to make something and they have the perk, then you could use them as crafters. So that's something that just built out for future, but it works. They will path to campfires, forges. They'll animate hammering or kneeling down and playing in the campfire or whatever. The animation is done for that. We've got to work through all the details, but the intent is for them to be crafters. You can hire them and set them to task of crafting. The next package is I just flushed out. It's called Zombie Dumb. It actually kind of works for zombies, but I haven't spent a lot of time on it. If you wanted to make a smart zombie, in theory, you could switch over to use this, but I ran into some bugs. I'm not going to cover them now, so I just kind of stubbed that out. And the same thing for animals. It's down the bottom. I've stubbed that out for animals. But the dumb animals, I still think EAI would probably be the way to go. That's basically the file. Hearing no questions. Dark, if you want to go up to the top. All right. So the very first section up there, this is all we had to work with when we started off. This and kind of rooting through the code. This is what I guess Gaz probably wrote this. So for what it's worth, you're going to read in UAI. It basically kind of gives you that explanation. The section right below it is a really excellent documentation written by Sphere. It's how I got my start in there. So you can just read this at your leisure. I've covered some of it. AI packages, you can use multiple AI packages. Just don't have like two different types of melee, like melee and melee enhance, because the overlap there is going to have it basically just, they're going to chatter between trying to do the same thing in two different packages. But this talks about how the actions are evaluated, scored, and tallied. Now in pure UAI, everything returns a float between a 0 and a 1. We found that in some cases it's cleaner just to make it essentially a bool. It's much easier for testing. We can always move these back to floats later on, but I'm telling you, with all this just picking weighting out of your ass and considerations and scoring, it was really hard to understand why they would do what they were doing when they were doing it. And so we went on certain things like, can he see me? Yes or no. Can I see him? Yes or no. Things like that. Is it an enemy? Yes or no. Not like, well, is it kind of an enemy? I mean, he's neutral but almost kind of scoring and I don't like him, maybe I'll attack him. We didn't want to get into that kind of confusion while we're debugging this thing. So some of these things are absolute Boolean, like it'll return a 0 or 1. And that's all in code, and we can unravel that as well. There's some logging, utility AI logging and utility AI logging min. Min basically just kind of tells you what task they decided. The utility AI logging goes through all the scoring in painful detail for debugging purposes. Very, very spammy in the log. So, you turn that on when you want to really understand why did they choose to do that, or why not. Here's some other thing. It talks a little bit about buffs. Buffs, it's comma delineated. So this is actually kind of powerful. I hardly have used it at all there. But when a task starts and the buff is added on, because of a consideration, you have a task that says, okay, if this wins, fire up this buff, right? Like it could be when Harley is wandering, and when Wander wins, it may fire the let her get chatty buff. And have her say something when she wanders, or when someone comes up finds a loot, while it's looting, maybe it should talk and say, "Oh, goody goody" or whatever. You can fire buffs when these things are added and when they're removed, when it starts and when it stops. So you guys know how powerful buffs are. Now you're able to, during the whole task scoring process, decide if it does other things as a reaction to that particular task. So it's crazy powerful. You guys, I'm sure, will have good fun with that. The action index, we changed that. Like when players use rifles, basically action 0 on a rifle is the firing, and action 1, which is the right mouse button, is aiming. Well, NPCs at this point don't aim. So what we did is reused action 0 on range. We changed it. So on melee, action 0 is essentially your left hand attack, basically like a jab. It's the left mouse would be the left mouse button. Your power attack is the right arm. So it separates right and left attacks using 0 and 1. 1 being the right would be right hook, a more powerful hit. A completely different animation for a club swing. It's the power attack is hooked into that. On a rifle, it's basically the the action 0 now becomes the melee attack with the rifle, and action 1 is the ranged attack. So be clear on that. We had to repurpose that a little bit. I think most of the stuff we've covered. Some I haven't used yet. He's got idle SDX. I've never even hooked that one, tried that one in there. I think we covered all of these move to targets, and you can read all the defaults and the parameters in there. Just trying to think, Stark, if there's something else. Pick a spot. Yeah, the NPC has a home territorial, act territorial, and stay near the area. That's still working in there. How it handles leadership is in there. Again, you can do all this, and if you have any questions, you can ask me. I think want to go down then? I covered Wander, I think, pretty well. What's this say? Yeah, this covers the orders. Follow, stay, wander, hire, loot, and targeting we covered. Let's see, pathing. You want to go up just a little. You can use pathing cubes with this, basically. Those of you who haven't done that, rather than teaching the character how to take a path by modeling it like we used to have before, now we use invisible pathing cubes with codes on them that are indexed to particular NPCs. So you can have a particular NPC spawn saying, I follow path 147. And he'll do that. He'll seek out blocks with 147. Or it could be random, or that way you can have different characters when they spawn in, they know what their path is. And so that's really great for setting up pathways through POIs, guard posts, and all of that stuff. So they can seek out gore blocks, workstations, signs with information on them, doors, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of power in there. Whether it all works, I have no idea. We haven't tested that extensively. But again, this is a framework. We have the intent that it works. If you find out it doesn't work, we go and debug it. And I say we by meaning SphereII. because if it's code,
Yeah, you guys had it working in Alpha 17.
yeah, it does work, but it's a matter of, we've changed the AI's conversation with it. So where the UAI inherits EAI functionality, it's probably going to work. If it's a complete disconnect, we got to hook it, go write the hooks for that. So, and just don't know till you get there whether it's working or not working. You can also consider, this was applied by the bandages, but if the character has items or not, then we're using tags to discriminate between all that. So one thing we're working on right now is, rather than having the walk types be completely random, we're trying to get it so if you put a beer in the backpack of an NPC, it will trigger the drunk walk.
Awesome.
That type of thing. If someone makes some marijuana, will trigger the happy walk. These are things that, based on what they have and what they don't have, you can make other things happen, be it animations, be it voice acting, be it looking for things. So again, I've activated I made a version of the buff status check 01, which checks the perk levels and all that kind of stuff. And I removed a bunch of stuff for now, like I took encumbrance out. But we could put encumbrance back in, and then if the NPC's encumbered, then he'd move slower. But the intent is it will use basically the overarching goal was, can we make an NPC do everything that the player can do? And use all of the player systems automatically through AI on every NPC, and allow you to make them all have different personalities and different behavior sets. That's the framework that we're trying to build. Is it all work? No. But again, we've been just kind of got it to the point where the important stuff works, the ranged and the melee and the following and teleporting when you're stuck. Those are the basic things that you could at least get started with them before you wouldn't throw your hands up and say, this is bullshit. I'm just going to use
Do you have the
haste.
dance animation in there?
There is there is going to be dancing. You pass a parameter, what time of dance you want. But again, I've roughed out some of the stuff. It's
just wondering.
Yeah, the dancing is in there. There is a male and a female dance hooked into the controller already, just one of each. And we can add whole routines if you want later on.
Because I am sure there's going to be someone that's going to want to pass out beers to their NPCs and have a dance party.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, it's all possible. There's also a random consideration. Sometimes you want things to mix it up a little. So we have a random consideration class that will allow it to fail out of that class and not always act the same. So it'll fire %.25 random. It'll only fire 25% of the time, and it will cancel out that particular task, 3/4 of the time. Anything down below that I need to cover? CVARs, go back up. I think I was covering CVARs. This kind of covers, the NPC in there. Target is ally, target is friendly, target is enemy. Are all in there. It gives you, ranges if you want to use those. Whether your target has a buff. So that's we were using it in the context of healing, but basically you could have, if a target has a don't shoot me bro buff, then your character would never shoot that guy. So you could use that, on there. You can also target based on CVARs rather than specifically buffs. So you can set a whole array of different variables on these guys and influence the considerations on the fly. So he doesn't have a CVAR, he has a CVAR, whatever. And so you can set those variables as well. Which I want to cover that real quick. And then down, we're working on is alerted, target is alive, target is dead, target same class. I haven't played with that one. Target tile entity is how it uses, identifies a particular tile. A tile entity is a block with data. It has data related to it. So like a block in the dirt, that's not it. A simple wood cube, not a tile entity. But a workstation is. A fireplace is. It's a block with a lot of active code in there. So basically the code declares it a tile entity. It's a tile entity, but in simple layman's terms, It's things like workstations and so forth. I think we covered all this in the actual examples. Anything down here? I think we covered all this. Yeah. So that's basically where we're at on it. You could see the goal of this wasn't to explain all of how every bit works. That'll come in time. It's to kind of give you an idea of the power of the system compared to before. You had tasks and targets, and that's pretty much it. And it was fixed on class-based targeting. Very, very limited. We just couldn't do any more with it realistically. So we decided to branch out this way. So I guess with that, I may have to stop recording because I can't see my screen. Maybe I can minimize this.
Yeah, I don't think any discussion is going to need to be recorded.
Okay, well, I'm just going to stop this recording then here. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. There it is.